What's next for Cuba and USA? Despite Cuba and USA are separated by less than 100 miles, the two nations have had no diplomatic relations since 1961. Both of them have been using Switzerland as a mediator whenever they need to talk. However, finally things may change. When Fidel Castro came into power in 1959, relations between the two countries quickly developed into arguments, political grandstanding by influencing the opinion of people and the international crisis. Castro permanently made a communist regime. This made US fear, so they even tried to kill and overthrow Fidel Castro's communist government with an operation called Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, which was a failed attempt by the US.
Porque lo que no pueden perdonarnos los imperialistas es que estemos aquí y que hayamos hecho una revolución socialista en las propias narices de los Estados Unidos.
Nikita Khrushchev, president of Russia, was very happy and delighted to help Cuba because Soviet Union was already an enemy of US before Cuban Missile Crisis. As Castro's regime increased trade with the Soviet Union, he nationalized US-owned properties and hiked taxes on US imports. The United States responded with escalating economic penalties. After slashing Cuba's cigarette imports, Washington instituted a ban on nearly all US exports to Cuba. Havana allowed the Soviet Union to install nuclear missile sites on the island in secret. At the end, Khrushchev agreed to withdraw Soviet missiles in exchange for a pledge from Kennedy not to invade Cuba and remove US nuclear missiles from Turkey. Now let's take a look at what's happening right now. After Obama decided to normalize relations with Cuba, he and Raul Castro came to negotiations. They agreed to significantly ease trade and financial restrictions, as well as limits on travel by Americans to Cuba, by using regulations and power to evade limits imposed by the embargo. They also concluded that Americans will be permitted to send more money to Cuban nationals, use their debit and credit cards in Cuba. Bring Cuban cigars to the US will be also allowed. Exports from US to Cuba will be made easier, allowing companies to export new different items. Banks from both countries will have the opportunity to open new relations within them. As Cuba is a state sponsor of terrorism, like others, both presidents agreed that US administration will make a review of the Cuba's status and will work with the Congress in order to lift the embargo and other sanctions imposed to Cuba. After the negotiations, the leader of each country came out to make the people know about the process of normalization between both countries, letting know what was going to be implemented to better relations and how their people were going to get benefits from this.
Good afternoon. Today, the United States of America is changing its relationship with the people of Cuba.
We recognize the position of President Obama and his administration against the blockade and his repeated appeals to Congress to have it removed.
Public opinion has always played an important role in this conflict. The nationalism and the continual polarization have directly affected the way politicians of both countries have proceeded at the different stages of this story. Still, nowadays, this seems to be moving into a positive direction. Not only the governments, but also Americans and Cubans citizens are willing to solve the differences they have been carrying throughout history. According to the New York Times, a non-partisan survey commissioned by the Atlantic Council, an outstanding Washington research institution, found 56% of respondents nationwide favor changing Cuba policy, and 52% also said Cuba should be deleted from the United States government's list of countries that are considered state sponsors of terrorism, the others being Iran, Syria, and Sudan. On the other hand, Cuban citizens also agreed to leave the discordances behind and to start building a normal relation with the United States. They are convinced this may bring benefits to them from economic development to opportunities to travel out the country and facilities to get vital medicines. According to cartasdesdecuba.com, an important blog that has always taken charge of showing the reality in Cuba, nearly the 70% of Cubans are expectant to the incoming changes the lift to embargo could bring. Here we show some new testimonies they gathered.
Podría entrar una medicina que hiciera falta a un enfermo, que bastante cara es, buscando un segundo o tercer país para poder entrar.
Que serían un poco mejor las relaciones gubernamentales y también vendrían nuevas cosas. Pienso que vendría un desarrollo económico y una mayor libertad para una comunicación con el pueblo de los Estados Unidos.
Y que podamos viajar también, que podamos salir de este país también.
Conocer.
The death of Fidel Castro and the election of Donald Trump in late 2016 revitalized the debate over U.S.-Cuba policy. The Republican showed support for Cuban opposition early in his presidential campaign, but later declared he would reverse Obama's reforms in the Castro's government, failed to release political prisoners, and guarantee Cuban citizens more political and religious liberties. Like all U.S. presidents, Trump can undo some or all of the executive actions of his predecessor. However, analysts say he would likely face significant opposition from U.S. business leaders if he decides to do it, because many U.S. companies have invested in new ventures in Cuba since the warming of relations. The re-election of a majority Republican U.S. Congress in 2016 increased the possibility that the trade embargo will remain in place. They have had blocked anti-embargo proposals. However, some congressmen who traveled to Havana with President Obama in 2016 are debating or creating a gradual approach focused on agriculture. To conclude, the lifting of the embargo not only brings economic, financial, and commercial benefit to both countries, but also marks the end of the polarization that involves the conflict between Cuba and USA.